I never imagined my 5th wedding anniversary would end with me walking away from my marriage. But when my husband slid those papers across the table, demanding half of my company, I knew everything had changed. And so did he, the moment I mentioned Clause 16b. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 5 years. Earlier, when I first met Mark Williams at a tech industry fundraiser in downtown Seattle, I wasn't looking for love. I was focused entirely on growing my fledgling company, Ecotech Solutions. We'd just secured our first major contract, and I was riding high on the promise of what my biodegradable packaging innovations could become. But Mark's charm was undeniable. The way he listened intently when I explained the science behind my products, how he asked thoughtful questions about my vision for sustainable manufacturing. He seemed genuinely impressed by my ambition, not intimidated by it. Most people at these events just talk about their stock portfolios, he said, clinking his champagne glass against mine. You're actually trying to solve real problems. His admiration felt refreshing, especially compared to the skepticism I usually encountered from potential investors who couldn't see past my gender or relatively young age. Mark was different, or so I thought. The heir to Anderson Capital, one of Seattle's oldest investment firms, he'd grown up with wealth and connections I could only dream of. Yet he carried himself with an unassuming confidence that made me feel comfortable in his presence. Our courtship was a whirlwind of waterfront dinners, weekend sailing on Puget Sound, and long conversations about our dreams for the future. Mark talked about wanting to step out from under his father's shadow, to make his own mark on the world rather than simply inheriting the family business. I shared my vision for revolutionizing the packaging industry, eliminating petroleum-based plastics one product at a time. "You're going to change the world, Jenny," he'd say, his eyes bright with what I believed was pride. "And I want to be there when you do." When he proposed 6 months later at Hurricane Ridge overlooking the Olympic Mountains, I hesitated. Not because I didn't love him, but because everything in my life was accelerating so quickly. Ecotech was gaining traction, demanding more of my time and energy. Could I balance a marriage with my growing company? "We'll be partners in everything," Mark promised, seeming to read my thoughts. "Your dreams are as important as mine." Those words swayed me. The idea of having a supportive partner, someone who valued my ambitions as much as his own, was powerful. I said yes. It was my best friend Samantha Torres who first suggested the prenuptial agreement. A sharp-minded business attorney whose practice specialized in protecting entrepreneurs, Sam had seen too many founders lose control of their companies through divorce. "It's not about trust, Jenny," she explained over coffee in her downtown office. "It's about protection. The Williams-Anderson family has a team of lawyers whose entire job is safeguarding their assets. You need the same." Initially, Mark seemed offended by the suggestion. "We're building a life together," he argued. "Why start with the assumption it might end?" But I stood firm, presenting it as a mutual protection, a clear delineation that would allow both of us to enter marriage with confidence in our respective businesses. Eventually, he agreed, though with a tightness around his eyes that should have warned me. Samantha drafted the agreement, including several provisions specific to my circumstances as a founder. Clause 16b, what she called the independence provision, stated unequivocally that any attempt by either spouse to force ownership changes in premarital business interests would trigger significant financial penalties. At the time, I thought it excessive, even slightly paranoid. "Trust me," Sam said as I hesitated over the wording. "I've seen perfectly lovely people transform when business and marriage collide." Mark's family lawyer reviewed the document with barely concealed disdain, but ultimately Mark signed. 2 weeks later, we were married in an elegant ceremony at Salish Lodge overlooking Snoqualmie Falls. Robert and Patricia Anderson, Mark's parents, hosted a reception that featured Washington's finest wines and a 5-course dinner prepared by a celebrity chef. Everything was perfect, at least on the surface. The first hint that something wasn't quite right came during Robert's toast. Standing tall in his custom tuxedo, crystal champagne flute raised, he welcomed me to the family with words that seemed gracious until I really heard them. "To Jennifer," he said, smiling broadly, "who will bring her creativity and enthusiasm to the Anderson legacy. We look forward to watching your little company grow under the family's guidance." Little company. Family guidance. The implications hung in the air, but in the blur of celebration, I pushed my concerns aside. Surely he was just making conversation, trying to connect my world to theirs in the only way he knew how. The early years of our marriage passed in a delicate balance. We bought a stunning lakeside home in Bellevue, with sweeping views of Lake Washington and a private dock where Mark kept his sailboat. I converted the garden house into a home office where I could work late without disturbing him. On weekends, we entertained friends or attended the endless rotation of charity galas and business functions that defined Seattle's upper echelon. Meanwhile, Ecotech Solutions was growing beyond my wildest expectations. My biodegradable shipping materials caught the attention of several large e-commerce companies looking to improve their environmental footprint. We expanded from a team of 3 to 25, moved into larger offices downtown, and were featured in national publications as pioneers in sustainable packaging. I was working constantly, exhilarated by each new milestone. Mark seemed supportive, attending product launches and company parties, charming my employees and business partners with his easy humor and genuine interest in their work. But as Ecotech's profile rose, I began noticing subtle shifts in his attitude. Questions about when I might scale back my involvement. Comments about starting a family before it's too late. Suggestions about bringing in experienced leadership to take the company to the next level. "You can't keep working 70-hour weeks forever," he'd say, his concern seemingly genuine. "Let someone else handle the day-to-day while you focus on innovation. That's where your real talent lies." It sounded reasonable, even caring. But I loved being CEO of Ecotech. Every aspect of the business energized me, from product development to marketing strategy to building our company culture. The thought of stepping back felt like abandoning my child. Then came the family dinners at the Anderson estate on Mercer Island. These monthly gatherings had always been somewhat tense affairs, with Patricia's barely concealed disappointment that I continued working rather than focusing on producing grandchildren, and Robert's dismissive questions about my hobby business. But as Ecotech gained prominence, their attitude shifted from dismissal to interest, though not the kind I would have hoped for. "You know, Jennifer," Robert said during one such dinner, swirling his aged scotch, "a company like yours would benefit tremendously from the right strategic partnership. Have you considered bringing in established investors?" "We're actually doing quite well with our current funding structure," I replied carefully. "Our last round was oversubscribed, and we're projecting profitability by third quarter." "Impressive," he nodded. "But think bigger. With the right backing, you could expand internationally, acquire competitors. Anderson Capital specializes in taking promising ventures to global scale." The conversation made me uneasy, but I saw no harm in being polite. "I'll keep that in mind for our next expansion phase." What I didn't realize was that this casual exchange was the beginning of a calculated campaign. Over the following months, Mark began bringing up his father's suggestions more frequently. Anderson Capital could provide favorable terms. His father had connections with overseas distributors. The family name would lend credibility to potential clients. "I'm just thinking about your best interests," Mark would say when I expressed reluctance. "Dad sees potential in Ecotech that even you might not recognize." Meanwhile, I was facing new challenges at work. A potential manufacturing partner unexpectedly backed out of negotiations. A key client suddenly demanded contract. Revisions. Our application for an important industry certification was delayed due to administrative concerns. All normal business hurdles, or so I thought. It was Danny, my VP of Operations, who first suggested something more coordinated might be happening. "Don't you think it's strange," she asked during a strategy session, "that we're hitting roadblocks with companies that all have business relationships with Anderson Capital?" I dismissed her concerns initially. The Seattle business world was interconnected. Overlap was inevitable. But her observation planted a seed of suspicion I couldn't quite shake. When Ecotech was approaching its 5th year, coinciding with our 5th wedding anniversary, we received exciting news. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Our innovative mushroom-based packaging material had been nominated for a prestigious sustainability award, and more importantly, several major retailers were interested in large-scale contracts. We needed capital for expansion, but our projections showed the investment would pay off exponentially. I shared the news with Mark over dinner at home, expecting his enthusiasm. Instead, he seemed oddly reserved. "That's great, honey," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about Ecotech's future. Dad's been working on something that could be perfect timing." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Anderson Capital is ready to make a significant investment in Ecotech. Dad's already discussed it with his partners. They're prepared to fund your expansion completely, plus add distribution channels through their existing network." "That's a serious offer," I said carefully. "I'd need to see the terms, of course, and discuss it with my board." Mark reached across the table to take my hand. "Jenny, this is exactly what you need, what the company needs. With the Anderson name behind you, those contracts you're chasing would be guaranteed." Something in his tone made me pull my hand back. Ecotech has gotten this far on its own merits. We don't need a name to legitimize us. His expression hardened slightly. "Don't be naive. Every successful company needs powerful backers. You've done amazing work getting Ecotech started, but to scale properly, you need what we can offer. You've done amazing work getting Ecotech started, as if my role was just the beginning, a prelude to the real business that would happen once the Andersons took over." "I'll think about it," I said, ending the conversation. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong, not just about the investment offer, but about Mark's certainty that I would accept it, as if my agreement were a foregone conclusion. The next morning, I arrived at my office earlier than usual and began digging through recent correspondence with clients and partners. Most interactions seemed normal, but there was a pattern of subtle interference. Introductions made without my knowledge, meetings scheduled with Anderson Capital representatives present, comments about future reorganization of Ecotech's structure. Then I found it. An email accidentally forwarded to my company account rather than my personal one. A message from Robert Anderson to Mark. "Once the funding agreement is signed, we'll implement the leadership transition plan we discussed. 3 months maximum before we integrate operations. Jenkins says their legal team has identified several patents that should be transferred to the holding company immediately." My blood ran cold. They weren't planning an investment, they were planning a takeover. And Mark was not just aware of it, he was actively facilitating it. I called Samantha immediately, forwarding her the email. "Those manipulative bastards," she muttered after reading it. "They're trying to do an end run around your independence. Classic corporate raider tactic. Create problems for a company, then swoop in with a solution that gives them control." "What should I do?" I asked, my voice steady despite the betrayal burning in my chest. "First, document everything. Second, secure your intellectual property further. I'll have my associate work on that today. Third," I could hear the grim smile in her voice, "remember Clause 16B? The prenuptial agreement, the independence provision that Mark had so reluctantly signed. That evening, I retrieved our marriage documents from the home safe and reread the clause. In the event that either party attempts to coerce, manipulate, or otherwise force the transfer of ownership or control of business interests established, prior to the marriage without express written consent freely given, said party immediately forfeits all claims to shared marital assets and property. Additionally, they shall bear full responsibility for all legal costs associated with the resulting separation proceedings. At the time, it had seemed like an unlikely scenario, a provision for a worst-case situation that would never materialize. Now, it appeared almost prophetic. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved carefully. On the surface, nothing changed. I went to work, came home, discussed everyday matters with Mark. I even expressed tentative interest in his father's investment proposal, requesting more information about the terms. Meanwhile, I worked with Samantha to document the coordinated interference in my business. We discovered that Karen Anderson, Mark's sister who worked in their legal department, had been researching ways to challenge my primary patents. Mark's college roommate, now an executive at one of our client companies, had been pressuring them to delay finalizing our contract until the new management structure was in place. I also took practical steps to protect myself. I secured additional funding from independent investors with no ties to Anderson Capital. I updated Ecotech's operating agreement to strengthen the board's resistance to hostile takeovers. I discreetly moved my essential personal items to a small apartment I rented in the city, telling the building manager I needed a pied-à-terre for late work nights. Most significantly, I reached out to Jason Chen, founder of Chen Sustainable Distribution and Robert Anderson's longtime business rival. Jason and I had met at industry conferences, but never worked together directly, partly because Mark had always discouraged it, citing complicated history between the families. "I've admired your innovations for years," Jason said when we met, for coffee at an out-of-the-way cafe. But I was told Ecotech was aligned exclusively with Anderson Capital. "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss," I replied. "I'm interested in exploring other partnership options." By the time our 5th anniversary arrived, I was prepared. Mark had made reservations at Cascade Heights, Seattle's most exclusive restaurant, with a private room overlooking the city skyline. He mentioned his parents would join us for dessert, to celebrate both our marriage and the exciting new chapter for Ecotech. I wore a deep blue dress that evening, not because it was Mark's favorite color, as he assumed, but because it projected confidence and authority. I'd learned early in my career that appearance mattered in business negotiations, and make no mistake, that's what this dinner would become. The meal began pleasantly enough. Mark was attentive, reminiscing about our wedding day, talking about the future as if nothing were amiss. I played along, smiling at the right moments, raising my glass to his toasts. If he noticed my coolness, he didn't show it. When Robert and Patricia arrived for dessert, the atmosphere shifted. Robert's confidence filled the private dining room, his hand heavy on my shoulder as he kissed my cheek in greeting. "Jennifer," he boomed, "you're looking lovely tonight. A special occasion deserves special beauty." Patricia nodded approvingly. "That dress is quite nice, dear." "Is it new?" "Thank you," I replied simply. "Yes, I bought it for tonight." As the server poured coffee and arranged delicate pastries on the table, Robert signaled to Mark, who produced a leather portfolio from beside his chair. "Jennifer," Robert began, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in board meetings. "Mark tells me you've been considering our investment proposal. We're prepared to move forward immediately." He gestured to the portfolio. "The paperwork is ready for your signature tonight." I glanced at the documents Mark was spreading across the table. Ownership transfer agreements, management restructuring plans, intellectual property assignments. Everything needed to legally transfer control of Ecotech to Anderson Capital, with Mark installed as nominal CEO. You want me to sign these now, without having my lawyer review them? I asked, my voice deliberately light. Patricia patted my hand condescendingly. Darling, these are standard agreements. The family lawyers have ensured everything is in order. There's no need to waste money on outside counsel. Besides, Robert added, his smile not reaching his eyes, we're family. This is just formalizing what we've all been working toward, bringing your company into the Anderson portfolio where it belongs. Where it belongs. As if my years of innovation, risk-taking, and vision meant nothing. As if Ecotech were simply a wayward asset finally, being claimed by its rightful owners. Actually, I said quietly, I've brought some paperwork of my own. I removed a slim folder from my purse and placed it on the table. Mark frowned. What's this? A reminder, I replied, opening the folder to reveal our prenuptial agreement, turned to the highlighted clause 16B. I thought we should all be clear about certain legal realities before proceeding. Mark scanned the text, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief as understanding dawned. Robert impatiently pulled the document toward himself, reading quickly, his face darkening. What nonsense is this? He demanded. It's a legally binding prenuptial clause that Mark and I both signed before our wedding, I explained calmly. It states that if either party attempts to force ownership changes to pre-existing business interests, they forfeit all claims to shared marital assets and are responsible for all legal fees resulting from separation. Patricia gasped. Separation? Jennifer, what are you saying? I looked directly at Mark, whose face had gone pale. I'm saying that I've discovered your coordinated efforts to pressure my company, interfere with my clients, and ultimately force me to transfer control of Ecotech to Anderson Capital. According to our agreement, those actions have consequences. This is ridiculous, Robert blustered, though I noticed a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. No court would uphold such a provision. The server approached to refill water glasses, and we all fell silent until he departed. The tension in the room was palpable. Actually, came a voice from the doorway, the provision is entirely enforceable in Washington state. Samantha Torres stood there, elegant in a charcoal suit, holding a slim briefcase. I'd arranged for her to have dinner at the restaurant that evening, timing her arrival perfectly. Sam Torres, attorney of record for the prenuptial agreement. She introduced herself smoothly. Mr. Anderson, your son had his own legal counsel review the document thoroughly before signing. They raised no objections to Clause 16B at that time. Mark stared at me, realization dawning that this had been carefully orchestrated. You planned this. No, Mark. You planned to take my company. I'm simply protecting what's mine. I turned to face his father. There's more you should know. This morning, Ecotech Solutions finalized a strategic partnership with Chen Sustainable Distribution. Jason Chen will join our board next month, and his company will become our exclusive distributor across 8 Western states. The effect of Chen's name was electric. Robert's face flushed deep red, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. The rivalry between Anderson Capital and Chen Enterprises was legendary in Seattle business circles. Both financial powerhouses. Both headed by proud, uncompromising men who had clashed repeatedly over the decades. You went to Chen? Mark's voice was barely audible, shock evident in every syllable. I went to a business partner who values my company for what it is. I replied evenly, not as an acquisition target. Robert stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. This is outrageous. Mark, we're leaving. Our lawyers will address this situation. But Mark remained seated, staring at the prenuptial agreement as if seeing it for the first time. Dad, wait, he said quietly. I need to understand what's happening here. Patricia looked frantically between her husband and son, her perfect composure cracking. Mark, come with us. This is obviously some kind of manipulation. The only manipulation, I said, has been the coordinated campaign to undermine my company, so you could acquire it cheaply. I placed another document on the table. These are copies of emails between Anderson Capital executives and several of Ecotech's clients and partners, encouraging them to delay contracts until our new management structure was in place. Emails that copied you, Mark. He couldn't meet my eyes. It wasn't like that. We were trying to help. Dad thought— I know exactly what your father thought, I interrupted. That my little project needed the Anderson touch to become legitimate. That I should be grateful for your family's interest. I stood, gathering my things. I built Ecotech from nothing. I secured the patents, the funding, the clients. I don't need the Anderson name to succeed. The private dining room had gone, completely silent except for Robert's heavy breathing. Even the ambient sounds of the restaurant beyond our door seemed muted, as if the world were holding its breath. Jennifer, Mark finally said, his voice strained. We can talk about this. At home. You're upset, but we can work through this. I looked at my husband of 5 years, this man I had loved, whose support I had believed in, who had been planning all along to claim my life's work as a family acquisition. There's nothing to work through, I said softly. I've moved out. The separation papers were delivered to your office this afternoon. According to our prenup, you keep the house. A significant financial loss for me, but worth every penny to maintain control of my company. With those words, I walked out of the private dining room, Samantha at my side. As the door closed behind us, I heard Patricia's quiet sob and Robert's furious whisper. I told you that prenup was suspicious. Why didn't you have it properly reviewed? In the elevator descending from the restaurant's top floor, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. My marriage was over. The life I had built with Mark, our home, our friends, our shared future, was gone. Despite knowing it was the right decision, despite having prepared for this moment, the finality of it hit me with unexpected force. You okay? Samantha asked gently as the elevator doors opened to the lobby. I took a deep breath, straightening my shoulders. I will be. Outside, Seattle's night air was cool against my skin. The city lights reflected in the puddles from an earlier rainfall, creating miniature constellations at my feet. I had lost something significant tonight, but I had saved something more valuable: my company, my independence, and most importantly, my self-respect. Where to? Samantha asked as the valet brought her car around. I thought about the empty apartment waiting for me downtown, with its minimal furnishings and boxes still unpacked. It would feel lonely tonight, but it was mine. A space untouched by Anderson influence, where I could begin rebuilding on my own terms. Home, I said firmly. Take me home. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, business, adjustments, and personal recalibration. True to the terms of our prenuptial agreement, Mark did not contest the separation, though Robert made noise about challenging certain provisions. His lawyers ultimately advised against it. The documentation of their interference with Ecotech was too comprehensive, the potential for public embarrassment too great. I threw myself into work, finalizing the partnership with Chen Sustainable and securing the manufacturing expansion Ecotech needed for our upcoming contracts. My executive team rallied around me, many of them expressing relief that the Anderson capital investment had fallen through. We were worried, my CFO confessed during a late strategy session. The Andersons have a reputation for gutting innovative companies and absorbing them into their conglomerate. The original vision rarely survives. 3 months after our anniversary dinner, Ecotech won the sustainability award we'd been nominated for. Standing on stage accepting the Gleaming Glass trophy, I spotted Patricia Anderson in the audience, seated with executives from a competing investment firm. Our eyes met briefly. She looked away first. I heard through industry channels that Robert had faced significant embarrassment among his peers. The story of his attempted hostile takeover of his daughter-in-law's company had spread through Seattle's business circles, raising questions about Anderson Capital's ethics and tactics. Several potential clients had backed away from deals, citing cultural fit concerns. Mark reached out once, about 4 months after our separation. We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near Pike Place Market, far from our usual haunts. He looked different, thinner, less polished, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "I should have stood up to my father," he said after we'd exchanged awkward greetings. "I got caught up in the Anderson way of doing things. It became normal to view every relationship, every connection as a potential business advantage. Would you have defended me if I hadn't had that prenup clause?" I asked. His hesitation before answering told me everything I needed to know. "I did love you, Jenny," he said finally. "I still do. But I've never known how to separate business from personal life. In my family, they're one and the same." We parted without animosity, but with the clear understanding that reconciliation was impossible. The divorce was finalized 2 months later, clean and quiet, exactly as the prenuptial agreement prescribed. 6 months after that fateful anniversary dinner, Ecotech Solutions went public. The IPO exceeded all projections, valuing the company at 3 times the amount Anderson Capital had offered for their investment. The partnership with Chen Sustainable had opened doors throughout the Pacific Rim, and our new manufacturing facility in Tacoma had created over 100 local jobs. I bought a penthouse in downtown Seattle with the proceeds, a space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the city and Puget Sound beyond. Some evenings I stand on my balcony watching the ferries cross the water, reflecting on how different my life might have been if I hadn't protected myself, if Samantha hadn't insisted on Clause 16B. Last week, at a regional business awards ceremony where I was receiving Entrepreneur of the Year, I spotted Robert and Patricia Anderson near the back of the hall. They were there supporting another company in their investment portfolio and clearly hadn't expected to see me. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded room. Patricia looked away immediately, but Robert held my gaze for a moment before giving a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Not approval exactly, but acknowledgement. In his world, power was the only currency that mattered, and I had proven I could play the game. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me, a recent business school graduate with eager eyes and ambitious dreams. "I've been following your company's story," she said. "Do you have any advice for someone just starting out?" I thought. About everything that had happened, the marriage, the betrayal, the liberation that followed. "Build something that's truly yours," I told her, "and get everything in writing, especially with the people you trust the most." The following weeks felt like walking a tightrope while maintaining a perfect poker face. Each morning I'd kiss Mark goodbye as he left for Anderson Capital, watching him slide into his Mercedes with the casual confidence of someone who believed the world was arranged precisely for his benefit. Each evening, I'd listen to his stories about board meetings and investment strategies, nodding in all the right places while my mind cataloged every piece of information that might prove useful. During daylight hours at Ecotech's downtown Seattle headquarters, I immersed myself in the expansion plans we desperately needed to implement. Our biodegradable packaging had caught the attention of major retailers, and with the right manufacturing capacity, we could transform from promising startup to industry leader within 18 months. The timing was critical, and the Andersons knew it. They had calculated their move perfectly, approaching when we needed capital most. "Jenny, these projections look solid," Danny said one afternoon as we reviewed financial models in my office. My VP of Operations had been with me since the beginning, leaving a comfortable position at a Fortune 500 company to join my risky venture because she believed in the technology. But the timeline is tight. If we don't secure additional funding, by next quarter, we'll miss the window with NatureMart. NatureMart was the eco-conscious retail giant whose partnership would put our packaging in stores nationwide. Their sustainability director had been enthusiastic about switching from their current plastic packaging to our mushroom-based alternative, but they needed assurance we could scale production to meet their demand. I know, I sighed, rubbing my temples. Anderson Capital's offer would solve the immediate funding gap. Danny's eyes narrowed slightly. She'd never trusted Mark's family, though she'd always been professionally cordial at company events. At what cost, though? What exactly are they asking for in return? I slid the term sheet across my desk, the preliminary offer Robert had, sent after our initial discussions. Danny read it carefully, her expression darkening with each page. 51% ownership? Board restructuring? This isn't an investment, Jenny. It's a takeover. I know, I said quietly. And there's more. I showed her the email that had been mistakenly forwarded to my company account, the one where Robert discussed the leadership transition plan with Mark. Danny read it twice, her face flushing with anger. They're planning to push you out of your own company, she said flatly, and your husband is helping them do it. The words hung in the air between us, stark and undeniable. Hearing someone else articulate what I'd been processing alone made it suddenly, painfully real. My throat tightened, but I refused to cry in my office. Yes, I managed. That appears to be the plan. Danny set the papers down carefully, as if they might contaminate her fingers. What are you going to do? It was the question I'd been asking myself constantly since discovering their scheme. The answer had been forming slowly, pieces clicking, into place like a complex lock mechanism finally aligning. I'm going to beat them at their own game, I said. But I need your absolute discretion. No one else can know what we're planning, not yet. Danny nodded without hesitation. You've got it. Where do we start? That afternoon, we began implementing what I came to think of as my contingency strategy. While maintaining the appearance of considering the Anderson offer, I directed Danny to quietly accelerate our discussions with independent investors who had previously expressed interest. We prioritized those with no business connections to Anderson Capital, no easy task in Seattle's interconnected financial community. I also reached out to 3 other manufacturing partners we had previously considered before selecting our current facility. If the Andersons were interfering with our expansion plans, we needed alternate pathways ready. Most crucially, I contacted Samantha to review our intellectual property protections. If the Andersons gained control of Ecotech, I needed to ensure our core patents remained secure. Your patents are solid, Sam confirmed after reviewing our portfolio. The question is whether they remain with you personally or with the company in the event of an ownership change. The way they're currently structured, they're company assets. Can we modify that arrangement? I asked. Sam hesitated. Technically, yes, but it would need board approval, which could alert the Andersons to your concerns. And if done improperly, it could be challenged as self-dealing. What about licensing? I suggested. Could we create a separate entity that licenses the patents to Ecotech under specific conditions? Sam's eyes lit up. That's actually brilliant. We could establish a holding company for the intellectual property with terms that require adherence to the original mission of sustainable manufacturing. Any deviation would terminate the license. She began making notes. It's complex, but doable if we structure it carefully. While Sam worked on the legal protections, I maintained my routine at home with Mark. We hosted dinner parties for his colleagues, attended charity functions, and discussed renovation plans for the kitchen. All the normal activities of our married life. If Mark noticed my subtle withdrawal, the slight distance I maintained even when we were physically close, he didn't mention it. Each night as he slept beside me, I would lie awake planning my next moves. The hurt and betrayal had crystallized into something harder, more focused, a determination to protect what I had built. Not just for myself, but for my team who had believed in Ecotech's mission, for the customers who relied on our products, and for the environmental impact we were creating. 3 particular challenges required my attention. First, several of our largest clients had suddenly become hesitant about renewing contracts, citing vague concerns about our long-term stability. Second, our application for an important sustainability certification had stalled in bureaucratic limbo. And third, our banking relationship had grown inexplicably complicated, with our line of credit coming under routine review. None of these obstacles was insurmountable on its own, but together they created mounting pressure on Ecotech's operations and cash flow. Pressure that made Anderson Capital's offer increasingly difficult to refuse. It was too coordinated to be coincidence. I decided to investigate these issues personally, starting with our largest wavering client, NatureMart. Instead of sending emails or making calls, I visited their headquarters in person, requesting a meeting with Diane Peters, their chief sustainability officer who had championed our partnership. "Jenny, this is unexpected," Diane said as her assistant showed me into her office. Her smile seemed genuine, if slightly uncomfortable. I thought our teams were handling the contract discussions. "They are," I replied smoothly, taking the ESI offered seat. "But I wanted to address your concerns about our stability directly. Ecotech is financially sound and fully committed to scaling production for NatureMart." Diane shifted in her chair. "It's not that we doubt your commitment, Jenny. It's just that we've received information suggesting Ecotech might be undergoing significant changes soon." "What kind of changes?" I asked, though I already suspected. She hesitated. "I probably shouldn't say this, but we were told by a reliable source that Ecotech will likely be acquired by Anderson Capital within the quarter, with a complete management restructuring to follow." There it was. Confirmation that the Andersons were actively undermining our business relationships to force my hand. "I see," I said calmly. "And who provided this reliable information?" "I can't reveal that," Diane said, but her eyes flickered toward a framed photo on her credenza. A golf tournament picture featuring several executives, including Mark's college roommate James Wilson, now NatureMart's VP of Procurement. The same James who had been unusually involved in our contract renewal discussions. "Let me be clear, Diane," I said, leaning forward. "Ecotech is not being acquired by Anderson Capital or anyone else. We are exploring standard investment options for our expansion, but our management team and mission remain unchanged." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder. In fact, I brought our updated manufacturing scale plan, which demonstrates our capacity to meet NatureMart's full volume requirements by Q3. We've also secured additional warehouse space in Portland to ensure regional distribution. This last part was a slight exaggeration. We were in negotiations for the warehouse but hadn't finalized the deal. Sometimes confidence was everything in business. Diane reviewed the documents with evident relief. By the end of our meeting, she had tentatively recommitted to our partnership, pending final contract review. As I was leaving, she touched my arm lightly. "Jenny, off the record, be careful with the Andersons. They play hardball in this town." I smiled. So do I, when necessary. The sustainability certification required a different approach. Our application had been filed months ago and should have been routine given our impeccable documentation. I contacted the certification agency directly and requested a meeting with the review committee chair, citing urgent clarifications needed. Dr. Alan Montgomery agreed to see me the following day at his university office, where he conducted his nonprofit work with the certification board. A distinguished environmental scientist with a reputation for uncompromising standards, he seemed an unlikely target for Anderson influence. "Dr. Montgomery, thank you for meeting with me," I began after introductions. "I'm concerned about the unusual delay with Ecotech's certification review." He adjusted his glasses, looking uncomfortable. "Yes, well, the committee has had some questions about your manufacturing processes. Nothing serious, but requiring additional verification." "What specific questions?" I pressed. Our submission included comprehensive third-party testing data for all materials. It's more about long-term consistency, he hedged. We received information suggesting your processes might change significantly under new ownership. Again, the shadow of Anderson interference. I took a deep breath. Dr. Montgomery, I respect your work immensely, which is why I'm going to be direct. Has someone from Anderson Capital contacted your committee regarding Ecotech's application? His startled expression confirmed my suspicion before he could deny it. I'm not at liberty to discuss committee communications, he said stiffly. I understand, but as a scientist, you value facts and transparency. The fact is, Ecotech remains independently owned and committed to our sustainable manufacturing processes. Any suggestions to the contrary are not only false, but potentially constitute illegal interference with our business operations. I placed a USB drive on his desk. This contains updated verification data from our production facility, plus documentation of our long-term commitments to sustainable sourcing. I hope the committee will review our application based on this factual information rather than speculation about potential ownership changes. Dr. Montgomery stared at the drive for a moment before nodding slowly. We always strive to make determinations based on scientific merit, Ms. Williams. I'll ensure the committee reviews this promptly. As I left his office, I made a mental note to have Samantha research whether the Andersons had any financial connections to the certification board or university. Their influence seemed to reach further than I had initially realized. The banking relationship proved the most challenging to address. Our primary financial institution, Pacific Northwest Bank, had been Ecotech's partner since our founding. The sudden review of our credit facilities was particularly suspicious given our excellent payment history and growing revenue. Rather than dealing with our usual account manager, I requested a meeting with the regional vice president, Catherine Morrison, whom I'd met at several business functions but never worked with directly. Jennifer, welcome, Catherine greeted, me in her corner office overlooking Elliott Bay. I understand you have concerns about the review of Ecotech's accounts. I do, I confirmed. The timing is disruptive to our operations, particularly as we're preparing for a significant expansion. Catherine nodded diplomatically. Regular reviews are standard procedure for credit facilities of your size. I assure you it's nothing personal. Is it standard procedure to conduct such reviews immediately after a client declines an acquisition offer from a major bank investor? I asked pointedly. Her poker face was impressive, but I caught the slight widening of her eyes. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Anderson Capital holds significant positions in Pacific Northwest Bank, doesn't it? And Robert Anderson serves on your board. Catherine's professional smile didn't waver. Our board members do not influence individual lending decisions. Of course not. That would be inappropriate, I agreed pleasantly. Just as it would be inappropriate for me to move Ecotech's banking relationships to your competitor and publicly cite concerns about conflicts of interest as the reason. It was a bold move, perhaps too bold, but I needed to understand exactly what kind of pressure we were facing. Catherine studied me for a long moment. Jennifer, I'm going to speak frankly. Yes, Robert Anderson is influential in our organization. But so are many other business leaders. Our review of Ecotech's credit was initiated through normal channels, based on your industry sector's recent volatility. And the fact that we recently declined an investment offer from Anderson Capital had nothing to do with it? She sighed, her practiced professionalism cracking slightly. I can't comment on that, but I can tell you that your credit facilities are not in jeopardy based on the financials I've reviewed. The process is simply taking longer than usual because… She hesitated. Because? Because certain members of the loan committee requested additional due diligence regarding Ecotech's leadership stability. Leadership stability. The euphemism was clear enough. I see, I said quietly. And if I were to provide documentation proving Ecotech's leadership remains unchanged, would that satisfy the committee's concerns? Catherine looked relieved at this practical approach. It would certainly help expedite the process. I left, the bank with a clearer understanding of what we were facing. The Andersons weren't just offering an investment with strings attached. They were systematically pressuring Ecotech from all angles, creating problems only their investment could solve. It was manipulative, possibly illegal, and utterly infuriating. But knowing their tactics gave me something essential, a way to counter them. That evening, I returned home later than usual, having stopped at Samantha's office to update her on the day's developments. Mark was already there, nursing a scotch in our living room, staring out at the darkening lake view. "Long day?" he asked as I set down my laptop bag. "Very," I replied truthfully. "Lots of unexpected complications." He patted the sofa beside him. "Come sit. Tell me about it." For a moment, looking at his familiar face, the face I had loved and trusted for 5 years, I almost wavered. What if I was misinterpreting everything? What if his intentions were genuinely supportive, just clumsily executed through his family's heavy-handed business approach? Then I remembered the email. The leadership transition plan. My little project. I sat beside him, maintaining a careful emotional distance even as I leaned against his shoulder. Just the usual startup challenges. Nothing we can't handle. "You know," he said, swirling his scotch, "Dad's offer would eliminate a lot of those challenges. The Anderson name opens doors that might otherwise remain closed." The irony of his statement, when his family was actively closing doors we had already opened, was almost too much to bear. "I'm still considering it," I lied smoothly. "But these things take time. It's a big decision." He kissed the top of my head. "Don't overthink it, Jenny. Sometimes the obvious solution is the right one." As Mark slept that night, I slipped out to my home office and made a decision. Playing defense against the Andersons' tactics wasn't enough. I needed to take control of the situation on my own terms. It was time to accelerate my contingency plan. First, I called Jason Chen of Chen Sustainable Distribution, despite the late hour. As I expected, he was still working. "Jenny Williams," he answered warmly. "I was just reviewing your proposal. Impressive technology." "Thank you, Jason. I'm calling because I'd like to fast-track our discussions. Are you available to meet tomorrow? For the opportunity to partner with Ecotech?" "Absolutely. But I was under the impression you were leaning toward Anderson Capital's offer." "That impression has been deliberately cultivated," I said carefully. "But it's not accurate. I'm seeking partners who value Ecotech's independence and mission." Jason chuckled. "Well, anyone who frustrates Robert Anderson's acquisition plans automatically interests me. Let's meet for breakfast, 7 a.m. at Harborview Terrace." Next, I emailed our board members requesting an emergency session the following afternoon. As a private company, Ecotech's board was small: myself, Danny, our CFO, Michael Reeves, and 2 independent directors with industry expertise. Critically, none had close ties to the Andersons. Finally, I drafted a detailed memo documenting the coordinated interference with our business operations, attaching the evidence I'd gathered. I encrypted the file and sent it to Samantha with instructions to be prepared to act if necessary. The next morning began with my breakfast meeting with Jason Chen. Unlike the Andersons' formal corporate setting, Jason preferred the casual atmosphere of Harborview Terrace, a local restaurant known for its excellent coffee and discretion. "I've admired your innovations for years," Jason said after we ordered. "Your mushroom-based packaging is revolutionary, but I was told Ecotech was aligned exclusively with Anderson Capital." "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss," I replied. "The Andersons have been suggesting partnerships that don't exist. In fact, they've been actively undermining our operations to pressure us into accepting their investment terms." Jason's expression darkened. "That sounds like Robert's playbook. He tried similar tactics with my father's company 20 years ago." I outlined my proposal. Chen Sustainable would become Ecotech's exclusive distributor across 8 Western states, with options to expand nationally. In exchange, they would provide an injection of growth capital and access to their established distribution infrastructure. This is a partnership, not an acquisition, I emphasized. Ecotech maintains its independence and leadership. Jason studied me thoughtfully. You realize this will make an enemy of Robert Anderson, don't you? He doesn't take rejection well, especially when it involves someone he views as competition. I'm already his enemy, I said simply. I just didn't know it until recently. By the time I arrived at Ecotech for the emergency board meeting, Jason and I had sketched the framework of our partnership agreement. Samantha joined us to present the evidence of Anderson interference and my proposed responses. This is troubling, said Eleanor Jenkins, one of our independent directors and a respected industry veteran. If what you're showing us is accurate, the Andersons have engaged in potentially illegal business interference. It's accurate, I confirmed. And there's more. My husband Mark has been actively facilitating their efforts while presenting himself as supportive of Ecotech's independence. The revelation of Mark's involvement shocked the board. Michael Reeves, our CFO, who had always gotten along well with Mark at company functions, looked particularly disturbed. Jenny, I don't know what to say, he began. This is a personal betrayal, as well as a business one. Yes, I acknowledged, keeping my voice steady, which is why I've taken steps to protect both myself and the company. I outlined my contingency strategy, the Chen Sustainable Partnership, the intellectual property protection measures, the documentation of interference, and my personal preparations for separation from Mark based on our prenuptial agreement. This is thorough, Eleanor said with evident respect. But are you prepared for the potential fallout? The Andersons won't take this lying down. I'm prepared, I assured her, though the truth was more complicated. I was as prepared as anyone could be for dismantling their marriage and confronting a powerful business adversary simultaneously. The emotional toll was something I could only estimate. The board unanimously approved the Chen Sustainable Partnership and the IP protection measures. They also authorized legal resources to defend against any potential Anderson retaliation. By the time the meeting concluded, I had their full support, professionally and personally. We're with you, Jenny, Danny said, speaking for the group. Whatever comes next. What came next was a carefully orchestrated week of preparation. While maintaining the appearance of considering the Anderson offer, I finalized the partnership agreement with Chen Sustainable, updated our key clients about our expansion plans, without mentioning the Anderson situation, and worked with Samantha to ensure all legal protections were in place. I also prepared for my personal transition. The apartment I'd rented in downtown Seattle gradually filled with essentials from our home: family photos, important documents, cherished books, and enough clothing to start a new life. I transferred my personal funds to accounts Mark couldn't access and confirmed the details of our prenuptial agreement's enforcement. Most difficult was preparing emotionally for the confrontation I knew was coming. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and manipulation, I had loved Mark. The death of that love, or perhaps the realization it had never been what I thought, left a hollow ache beneath my calculated planning. The night before our anniversary, I found Mark in his home office reviewing documents. Assuming they were related to work, I paid little attention until I glimpsed the Ecotech logo on one of the pages. Moving casually behind him, I saw he was reviewing a restructuring plan for my company, complete with a new organizational chart that listed him as CEO and me as founder and technical advisor, a mere figurehead in the company I had built. He didn't notice my presence until I stepped back, the floor creaking slightly beneath my feet. He turned, quickly covering the documents with a folder. Jenny, I didn't hear you come in. Clearly, I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the renewed anger burning in my chest. Working late? Just some prep for tomorrow's meetings, he replied smoothly. Nothing interesting. The casual lie, delivered with such ease, was the final confirmation I needed. Whatever doubts or hesitations I might have harbored about my course of action evaporated in that moment. "Our dinner reservation is at 7, I reminded him. "Don't be late. It's a special occasion after all." He smiled, reaching for my hand. 5 years. Can you believe it? "No," I said truthfully. "I really can't." That night, I barely slept, running through scenarios and contingencies. By dawn, I was exhausted but resolute. I dressed with particular care for work, choosing a structured blue dress that projected confidence and authority. Before leaving, I placed a small overnight bag in my car trunk, the final items I'd need if things went as expected. The workday passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. The partnership agreement with Chen Sustainable was signed and notarized. The intellectual property protection measures were implemented. The documentation of Anderson interference was updated with the latest evidence and securely stored with Samantha. By late afternoon, I received confirmation that Mark's parents would indeed be joining us for our anniversary dinner, just as Mark had mentioned casually the previous week. The stage was set. I left the office early to change for dinner, choosing a deep blue evening dress that had always been a favorite for important occasions. As I fastened my mother's pearl earrings, a wedding gift I'd cherished, I studied my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me appeared outwardly calm, but I could see the determination in her eyes, the slight tension in her jaw. This was not how I had imagined celebrating 5 years of marriage. But then, the marriage itself had not been what I imagined either. Mark arrived home at 6, bearing roses and a small jewelry box that contained a diamond bracelet. "Happy anniversary, darling," he said, kissing me as he fastened it around my wrist. "Here's to many more." The irony was almost unbearable. We drove separately to the restaurant. I claimed I might need to stop by the office afterward to check on a manufacturing issue. In reality, I wanted my own transportation for what would come after. Cascade Heights occupied the top floor of Seattle's tallest building, offering panoramic views of the city, Puget Sound, and on clear evenings like this one, the Olympic Mountains beyond. The exclusive restaurant had been the site of countless business deals, political negotiations, and society engagements. Tonight, it would witness the end of my marriage and the protection of my company. Mark and I were escorted to a private dining room where a single table was set with fine china and crystal, fresh flowers, and unobtrusive candles. A bottle of champagne chilled in a silver bucket. "Perfect," Mark approved, tipping the maitre d' generously. "My parents will join us for dessert around 8:30. We were seated by a window overlooking the city lights emerging as dusk settled. For the first part of the meal, we maintained the appearance of a couple celebrating a milestone. Mark reminisced about our wedding, our honeymoon in New Zealand, the purchase of our lake house. I smiled and responded appropriately, raising my glass to his toasts while my portfolio rested against my chair, containing the documents that would change everything. "You seem distracted," Mark observed as our main courses arrived. "Thinking. About the expansion plans?" "Among other things," I acknowledged. "It's a pivotal time for ecotech." "It certainly is," he agreed, his expression shifting subtly to something more calculating. "Which reminds me, Dad wants to finalize the investment details tonight. He's bringing the paperwork." So they weren't just joining us for a celebratory dessert. This had been planned as the night they would secure their takeover of my company, using our anniversary as the setting, presumably thinking I wouldn't make a scene on such an occasion. "How convenient," I said mildly. "I've brought some paperwork, too." Mark looked momentarily confused but didn't pursue the comment. Instead, he launched into a detailed description of how the Anderson investment would transform ecotech, the doors it would open, the growth it would enable, all presented as benefits to me, though I now understood they were merely the sugarcoating on a poison pill. By the time Robert and Patricia Anderson arrived, I had finished my entree but barely tasted it. My focus had narrowed to the confrontation ahead. "There she is," Robert boomed as he entered the private room, crossing to kiss my cheek. His confidence filled the space, a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. "The woman who's about to join the Anderson business legacy." Patricia embraced me with her usual polite restraint. "Happy anniversary, dear. That dress is lovely." "Thank you," I replied simply. "Yes, I bought it specially for tonight." As the server poured coffee and arranged delicate pastries on the table, Robert signaled to Mark, who produced a leather portfolio from beside his chair. "Jennifer," Robert began, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in board meetings, "Mark tells me you've been considering our investment proposal. We're prepared to move forward immediately." He gestured to the portfolio. "The paperwork is ready for your signature tonight." I glanced at the documents Mark was spreading across the table. Ownership transfer agreements, management restructuring plans, intellectual property assignments. Everything needed to legally transfer control of Ecotech to Anderson Capital, with Mark installed as nominal CEO. "You want me to sign these now, without having my lawyer review them?" I asked, my voice deliberately light. Patricia patted my hand condescendingly. "Darling, these are standard agreements. The family lawyers have ensured everything is in order. There's no need to waste money on outside counsel." "Besides," Robert added, his smile not reaching his eyes, "we're family. This is just formalizing what we've all been working toward, bringing your company into the Anderson portfolio where it belongs." Where it belongs. As if my years of innovation, risk-taking, and vision meant nothing. As if Ecotech were simply a wayward asset finally being claimed by its rightful owners. I took a deep breath, centering myself for what came next. The moment had arrived to activate the protection I had put in place years ago, the clause that Samantha had insisted I include in our prenuptial agreement, the provision I had never expected to need. "Actually," I said quietly, "I've brought some paperwork of my own." I removed a slim folder from my purse and placed it on the table beside the stack of Anderson Capital documents. The contrast was stark, their thick portfolio of legal papers against my single thin file. "What's this?" Mark asked, frowning slightly. "A reminder," I replied, opening the folder to reveal our prenuptial agreement. The pages turned to Clause 16B, highlighted in yellow. "I thought we should all be clear about certain legal realities before proceeding." Mark scanned the text, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief as understanding dawned. Robert impatiently pulled the document toward himself, reading quickly, his face darkening with each line. "What nonsense is this?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the refined atmosphere of the private dining room. "It's a legally binding prenuptial clause that Mark and I both signed before our wedding," I explained calmly. "It states that if either party attempts to force ownership changes to pre-existing business interests without mutual consent, they forfeit all claims to shared marital assets and are responsible for all legal fees resulting from separation." Patricia gasped softly. "Separation? Jennifer, what are you saying?" I looked directly at Mark, whose face had gone pale. "I'm saying that I've discovered your coordinated efforts to pressure my company, interfere with my clients, and ultimately force me to transfer control of Ecotech to Anderson Capital. According to our agreement, those actions have consequences." Robert's fingers tightened around his water glass. "This is ridiculous," he blustered, though I noticed a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "No court would uphold such a provision." The server approached to refill water glasses, and we all fell silent until he departed. The tension in the room was palpable, the celebratory atmosphere completely evaporated. "Actually," came a voice from the doorway, "the provision is entirely enforceable in Washington state." Samantha Torres stood there, elegant in a charcoal suit, her expression professionally neutral. I'd arranged for her to have dinner at the restaurant that evening, timing her arrival precisely. "Sam Torres, attorney of record for the prenuptial agreement," she introduced herself smoothly. Mr. Anderson, your son had his own legal counsel review the document thoroughly before signing. They raised no objections to Clause 16B at that time. Mark stared at me, realization dawning that this had been carefully orchestrated. You planned this. No, Mark, you planned to take my company. I'm simply protecting what's mine. I turned to face his father. There's more you should know. This morning, Ecotech Solutions finalized a strategic partnership with Chen Sustainable Distribution. Jason Chen will join our board next month, and his company will become our exclusive distributor across 8 Western states. The effect of... Chen's name was electric. Robert's face flushed deep red, his fingers tightening around his fork. The rivalry between Anderson Capital and Chen Enterprises was legendary in Seattle business circles. Both financial powerhouses, both headed by proud, uncompromising men who had clashed repeatedly over the decades. You went to Chen? Mark's voice was barely audible, shock evident in every syllable. I went to a business partner who values my company for what it is, I replied evenly, not as an acquisition target. Robert stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. This is outrageous. Mark, we're leaving. Our lawyers will address this situation. Patricia looked frantically between her husband and son, her perfect composure cracking. Mark, come with us. This is obviously some kind of manipulation, but Mark remained seated, staring at the prenuptial agreement as if seeing it for the first time. Dad, wait, he said quietly. I need to understand what's happening here. The only manipulation, I said, has been the coordinated campaign to undermine my company so you could acquire it cheaply. I placed another document on the table. These are copies of emails between Anderson Capital executives and several of Ecotech's clients and partners, encouraging them to delay contracts until our new management structure was in place. Emails that copied you, Mark. He couldn't meet. My eyes. It wasn't like that. We were trying to help. Dad thought... I know exactly what your father thought, I interrupted. That my little project needed the Anderson touch to become legitimate. That I should be grateful for your family's interest. I stood, gathering my things. I built Ecotech from nothing. I secured the patents, the funding, the clients. I don't need the Anderson name to succeed. Robert's hand came down hard on the table, causing the crystal to jump. You ungrateful! He caught himself, glancing at the open door where a server was passing. Even in his anger, he was conscious of appearances. Mark, handle your wife, now. The command in his voice was unmistakable, as was the assumption of authority, that Mark could and should control me, that this uprising needed to be quelled before it embarrassed the Anderson name. Mark looked torn, caught between his father's expectations and the evidence before him. Jenny, can we discuss this privately? There must be a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The emails are quite clear about your family's intentions for my company, as is the organizational chart on your desk showing you as CEO and me demoted to technical advisor. His eyes widened at the mention of the document I'd glimpsed in his office. You went through my papers? I didn't need to. You left them open on your desk last night. I reached for my purse, ready to conclude this painful scene. The separation papers were delivered to your office this afternoon. According to our prenup, you keep the house. A significant financial loss for me, but worth every penny to maintain control of my company. Patricia grabbed Mark's arm. You can't seriously be considering this. It's just a tantrum because she's not getting her way. Call your lawyer, challenge the prenup. I met her gaze directly. The prenup has already been reviewed by 3 separate law firms. It's ironclad, Patricia. And given the evidence of deliberate interference with Ecotech's operations, Any challenge would only result in further public embarrassment for your family. Robert's face had turned an alarming shade of red. No one speaks to me this way. No one. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? Yes, I said simply. I know exactly who I'm dealing with now. That's the problem. I nodded to Samantha, who had remained a silent, professional presence by the door. Together, we prepared to leave the private dining room. The anniversary dinner concluded in a way none of us had anticipated at its start. As I reached the threshold, Mark finally found his voice again. Jenny, wait. We can work this out. I paused, looking back at the man I had loved, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. He sat there, caught between his family's legacy and the woman he'd promised to cherish, unable to stand firmly with either. No, Mark, we really can't. We walked out of the private dining room, leaving the Anderson family in stunned silence. In the hallway, I could hear Robert's angry whispers beginning, no doubt already strategizing damage control. The restaurant's other patrons glanced curiously at us as we passed, sensing the aftermath of confrontation in our wake. In the elevator descending from the restaurant's top floor, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. My marriage was over. The life I had built with Mark, our home, our friends, our shared future, was gone. Despite knowing it was the right decision, despite having prepared for this moment, the finality of it hit me with unexpected force. You okay? Samantha asked gently as the elevator doors opened to the lobby. I took a deep breath, straightening my shoulders. I will be. Outside, Seattle's night air was cool against my skin. The city lights reflected in the puddles from an earlier rainfall, creating miniature constellations at my feet. I had lost something significant tonight, but I had saved something more valuable: my company, my independence, and most importantly, my self-respect. Where to? Samantha asked as the valet brought her car around. I thought about the empty apartment waiting for me downtown, with its minimal furnishings and boxes still unpacked. It would feel lonely tonight, but it was mine. A space untouched by Anderson influence, where I could begin rebuilding on my own terms. Home, I said firmly. Take me home. The days immediately following that fateful dinner unfolded in a blur of legal proceedings and business adjustments. True to the prenuptial agreement, Mark did not contest the separation on financial grounds, though Robert made noise about challenging certain provisions. Their lawyers ultimately advised against it. The documentation of their interference with Ecotech was too comprehensive, the potential for public embarrassment too great. I spent most of my waking hours at Ecotech's offices, immersing myself in work to avoid dwelling on my personal loss. The partnership with Chen Sustainable Distribution moved forward rapidly, with Jason proving to be exactly the kind of ally I had hoped for. Respectful of our independence while providing the resources we needed to expand. You've created quite the stir in certain circles, Jason remarked during our first official partnership meeting. Robert Anderson apparently had a meltdown at the Pacific Club when he heard about our agreement. Broke a very expensive tumbler, I'm told. I couldn't summon much satisfaction at the image. This wasn't about revenge, I said quietly. It was about protection. Jason nodded thoughtfully. The best business decisions usually are. 2 weeks after the separation, I received a text from Mark asking to meet. We arranged to see each other at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near Pike Place Market, far from both our usual haunts and the business district where we might encounter mutual acquaintances. He was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table with 2 coffees. He looked different, thinner, somehow diminished without his usual confident bearing. The wedding band was gone from his finger, I noticed. Thank you for coming, he said, pushing one of the coffees toward me. I wasn't sure you would. We have things to discuss, I replied, taking the offered cup but not drinking. The house, the remaining possessions. The lawyers can handle, Those details. He hesitated, studying my face. I wanted to see you, to explain. Explain what, Mark? How you plan to take over my company? How you and your father systematically undermined my business relationships to pressure me into accepting your terms? He winced. It wasn't supposed to be like that. Dad saw potential in ecotech, real potential. His methods are from a different era. He believes in aggressive acquisition strategies. And you? What do you believe in? Mark looked down at his coffee, unable to meet my eyes. I believed in us, in our partnership. I thought bringing you into the Anderson business world would strengthen that bond. By making me subordinate to you professionally? By demoting me in my own company? The hurt and anger I'd been channeling into productive work surfaced unexpectedly. That organizational chart on your desk had me reporting to you, Mark, after everything I built. I should have stood up to my father, he admitted, his voice low. I got caught up in the Anderson way of doing things. It became normal to view every relationship, every connection as a potential business advantage. Would you have defended me if I hadn't had that prenup clause? I asked, needing to hear the truth. His hesitation before answering told me everything I needed to know. I did love you, Jenny, he said finally. I still do, but I've never known how to separate business from personal life. In my family, they're one and the same. A profound sadness washed over me, not just for the end of our marriage, but for the man before me who had been shaped by values that prioritized acquisition over connection, power over partnership. I'm sorry it ended this way, I said, meaning it despite everything. But I couldn't give up ecotech, not even for you. I know that now. He pushed a small envelope across the table. My personal apology for the interference with your clients. I've already contacted each one to retract any misleading statements about ecotech's future. It was a small gesture, but significant coming, from a man raised in a family where admitting wrongdoing was seen as weakness. I accepted the envelope with a nod. What will you do now? I asked. Dad wants me to take over their clean energy division. Away from Seattle, fresh start. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Apparently, I need to prove myself after this setback. We parted without animosity, but with the clear understanding that reconciliation was impossible. The divorce was finalized a month later, clean and quiet, exactly as the prenuptial agreement prescribed. At Ecotech, we moved forward with renewed purpose. The financial stability provided by the Chen partnership allowed us to expand our manufacturing capacity and meet the demands of our growing client base. We hired 15 new employees and secured additional office space to accommodate our expanding operations. The sustainability certification that had mysteriously stalled came through with flying colors, and Dr. Montgomery personally called to congratulate me, subtly acknowledging the political pressure his committee had faced. Your materials exceeded all our benchmarks, he said. It's innovations like yours that will transform the packaging industry. Most gratifying was watching my team thrive without the shadow of a potential Anderson takeover hanging over them. Danny stepped into an expanded role as Chief Operating Officer, overseeing our production scaling with remarkable efficiency. Michael Reeves, our CFO, secured additional favorable financing now that our banking relationship had been clarified and strengthened. 3 months after the separation, we received unexpected news. Ecotech had been nominated for the Governor's Excellence in Sustainable Business Award, a prestigious recognition that typically went to much larger established companies. The ceremony would be held at the state capitol, with significant media coverage and networking opportunities. This is huge, Jenny, Danny exclaimed when the notification arrived. This puts us on the map statewide. Do you think the Andersons had anything to do with the nomination? Michael asked, his expression concerned. Some kind of reconciliation attempt? I shook my head. Not their style. Besides, our metrics speak for themselves. We've reduced plastic waste by measurable tons and created a genuinely sustainable alternative. The awards ceremony fell on a rainy Thursday evening in Olympia. I drove down with Danny and Michael, the three of us laughing and speculating about our chances as the wipers cleared sheets of typical Northwest precipitation from the windshield. The normalcy of the moment struck me. How good it felt to be focused entirely on Ecotech's future, without balancing Anderson family expectations. The Capitol building was illuminated against the dark sky, its dome glowing warmly above columns that had witnessed more than a century of state history. Inside, the reception hall buzzed with conversations as business leaders, politicians, and environmental advocates mingled before the ceremony. I was speaking with the head of the state's Environmental Protection Department when I spotted them. Across the room, Robert and Patricia Anderson, elegant as always in formal attire, speaking with a state senator. They were likely there supporting another company in their investment portfolio, unaware that Ecotech would be recognized tonight. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded room. Patricia looked away immediately, but Robert held my gaze for a moment, before giving a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Not approval exactly, but acknowledgement. In his world, power was the only currency that mattered, and I had proven I could play the game. I turned back to my conversation, refusing to let their presence distract from Ecotech's moment. When the awards were announced, we received not only the Excellence in Innovation category we'd been nominated for, but also the evening's highest honor, the Governor's Impact Award for contributions to the state's environmental goals. Ecotech Solutions represents the future of sustainable business in our state, the governor said as she presented the award. Their innovative approach proves that environmental responsibility and economic growth can go hand in hand. Standing at the podium, looking out at the gathered business leaders, including the Andersons at their distant table, I felt a surge of vindication. This recognition came not from family connections or financial leverage, but from the genuine value Ecotech had created. This award belongs to our entire team, I said during my brief acceptance speech. And to everyone who believes that business can be a force for positive change when we prioritize innovation over tradition, collaboration over control. If the Andersons recognized the subtle reference to their tactics, they gave no indication. Their polite applause blended with the enthusiastic response from the rest of the audience. After the ceremony, as we celebrated with champagne and conversation, a young woman approached me, a recent business school graduate with eager eyes and ambitious dreams. "I've been following your company's story," she said. "I'm starting my own sustainable products venture, and you're such an inspiration. Do you have any advice for someone just starting out?" I thought about everything that had happened. The marriage, the betrayal, the liberation that followed, the lessons learned at such personal cost. "Build something that's truly yours," I told her, "and get everything in writing, especially with the people you trust the most." 6 months after that fateful anniversary dinner, Ecotech Solutions was ready for its biggest move yet, going public. The IPO had been in preparation for weeks, with investment banks competing for the opportunity to lead the offering. We selected a mid-size firm with strong environmental credentials and a reputation for supporting women-led companies. The night before our filing went public, I stood on the balcony of my downtown penthouse, looking out over the Seattle skyline. The lights of the buildings reflected in Elliott Bay, a mirror image of human ambition captured in still water. So, much had changed in half a year. My marriage ended, my company transformed, my understanding of both business and personal relationships fundamentally altered. My phone chimed with a text from Jason Chen. "Ready for tomorrow? The financial world won't know what hit them." I smiled, typing back, "As ready as anyone can be for a public offering. Thanks for everything, Jason." His partnership had been instrumental in our growth, providing not just distribution infrastructure but strategic advice based on his decades navigating the complex world of business rivalries and public markets. Another text arrived, this one from Samantha. Just reviewed the final prospectus. Clean as a whistle. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be historic. Sleep, however, proved elusive. I found myself revisiting the journey, from the early days of ecotech when I'd worked in a tiny rented lab space, testing mushroom substrates and biodegradable polymers, to this moment on the cusp of taking the company public at a valuation that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. I thought about Mark, too, wondering how he was faring in his new role. We hadn't spoken since our cafe meeting, though I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd relocated to Anderson Capital's Boston office, putting physical distance between himself and the Seattle business community, where the story of our separation had become something of a cautionary tale. The morning dawned clear and bright, a rarity for Seattle in early spring. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit, selecting my mother's pearls again, a touchstone connecting me to my roots, to the woman who had taught me resilience long before I understood its value. At Ecotech's offices, the team had gathered early, an atmosphere of nervous excitement permeating the space. Danny had arranged for a large screen to display the trading platform once our shares went live. The opening bell rings in 20 minutes, Michael announced, distributing champagne, flutes filled with orange juice. We'll save the real champagne for after we see the numbers. I looked around at the faces of my team, people who had believed in Ecotech's mission from the beginning, who had weathered the uncertainty of the Anderson situation, who had worked tirelessly to reach this milestone. Whatever happened when our stock began trading, we had already succeeded in the ways that truly mattered. I want to thank all of you, I said, raising my glass. Not just for your work, but for your loyalty, for standing with me when it would have been easier to accept the Anderson offer and the security it promised. Security built on surrender isn't security at all, Danny responded, raising her own glass. To independence. To independence, everyone echoed. When our stock symbol appeared on the screen, the initial price immediately jumped above the offering range we'd established. A cheer went up as we watched the numbers climb, institutional investors clearly recognizing the value proposition Ecotech represented. By mid-morning, we had nearly doubled our initial offering price. Congratulatory messages flooded in from clients, partners, and even competitors acknowledging our success. The business press coverage was overwhelmingly positive, highlighting our sustainable mission and innovative technology. One headline in particular caught my attention. Ecotech soars in market debut, outperforming Anderson Capital's clean energy division. The accompanying article noted that Mark Williams, recently appointed to head that division, had declined to comment on his ex-wife's company's success. I felt no satisfaction in the comparison. Our paths had diverged, and Ecotech's triumph wasn't about besting the Andersons. It was about fulfilling our own potential, unencumbered by their limiting vision for what my company could be. As the champagne finally flowed and the celebration gained momentum, I stepped away briefly, finding a quiet corner of the office to absorb the magnitude of the day. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unlisted number. Jennifer Williams, I answered. Congratulations are in order, it seems. Robert Anderson's distinctive voice was instantly recognizable, though his tone lacked its usual commanding certainty. For a moment, I was too surprised to respond. Mr. Anderson, this is unexpected. Yes? Well? He cleared his throat. I've never been one to ignore impressive performance, regardless of personal complications. It was as close to an acknowledgement of my success as I could expect from a man like Robert Anderson, a man who had never apologized for anything in his life, who viewed concession as weakness. Thank you, I said simply, refusing to make this easier for him. You've proven more formidable than I anticipated, he continued. Chen made a smart move partnering with you. The backhanded compliment was so characteristic of him that I almost laughed. Even now, he couldn't give credit directly. It had to be filtered through his acknowledgement of Jason's business acumen. "Was there something specific you wanted?" "Mr. Anderson?" I asked, unwilling to engage in verbal sparring on what should be a day of celebration. "Just to say that business is business. No hard feelings." His tone suggested this magnanimous gesture should be received with gratitude. "I appreciate the sentiment," I replied neutrally, "though I think we have very different definitions of how business should be conducted." A pause then. "Perhaps. In any case, I expect we'll be seeing more of each other now that ecotech has entered the public arena. The business community in this region is smaller than it appears." The implicit warning, or perhaps invitation to renewed competition, was clear. Robert Anderson might acknowledge my success today, but he had no intention of ceding his influence or changing his tactics. "I look forward to demonstrating that ethical business practices and success aren't mutually exclusive," I said, ending the conversation on my terms. As I rejoined the celebration, I felt oddly liberated by the exchange. 6 months ago, a call from Robert Anderson would have triggered anxiety about his influence over my marriage and company. Today, it was simply a conversation between business leaders, one established, one ascending, both aware of the other's capacity. The IPO celebration continued well into the evening, eventually transitioning to a nearby restaurant where we'd reserved a private room. Surrounded by my team and closest supporters, including Samantha and Jason, I found myself filled with gratitude for this unexpected journey. "A toast," Jason proposed, raising his glass. "To Jenny Williams, who proved that the best way to handle bullies in business is to outsmart them at their own game." "And to ecotech," Samantha added, "a company built on innovation rather than intimidation." As glasses clinked and conversations flowed around me, I caught sight of my reflection in the restaurant's window. The woman looking back at me appeared stronger, more confident than the one who had discovered her husband's betrayal 6 months earlier. The pain of that discovery hadn't disappeared entirely. Such wounds never heal completely, but it had. Transformed into something productive, a hard-earned wisdom about trust, power, and resilience. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text message from a name I hadn't seen in months. Mark. "Saw the IPO news. Congratulations, Jenny. You deserve it." I stared at the screen for a long moment, considering whether to respond. Finally, I typed a simple "thank you" and put the phone away. This day wasn't about the past. It was about the future ecotech would build, independent of Anderson influence or approval. Later that night, returning to my penthouse, I stepped out onto the balcony again. The city lights seemed especially vibrant, or perhaps it was just my perception, colored by the day's success. I thought about the journey ahead, the responsibility of leading a public company, the opportunities for expanding our sustainable mission, the challenges that would inevitably arise. I was ready for all of it. Not because I had all the answers or because success was guaranteed, but because I had learned the most valuable lesson in business and in life: the strength that comes from standing firmly in your own truth, regardless of who tries to undermine it. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of the bay below. I closed my eyes, feeling the cool air against my skin, and made a silent promise to myself. Whatever came next, whatever new challenges the Andersons or others might present, I would face it on my terms with my values intact. That was the true meaning of independence. 1 year after ecotech's successful IPO, I stood at the podium of the National Sustainable Business Conference, looking out at hundreds of industry leaders gathered in the grand ballroom of San Francisco's Fairmont Hotel. The journey from that confrontational anniversary dinner to this moment, delivering the keynote address at the country's most prestigious green business event, felt both surreal and deeply earned. The future of business isn't just about profit margins, I told the attentive audience. It's about creating systems that regenerate rather than deplete. At ecotech, we've proven that sustainable practices aren't just ethically sound, they're economically powerful. From my vantage point on stage, I could see faces I'd come to know well over the past year. Jason Chen sitting with his executive team, Samantha and her law partners at a table near the front, and my own leadership team, scattered throughout the room. They had all been instrumental in Ecotech's remarkable growth. Our stock price had tripled since the IPO, and our manufacturing facilities now operated in 3 states, with international expansion underway. What I hadn't expected to see was the table of Anderson Capital executives near the back of the room. Robert wasn't present, but several of his senior leadership team were, including his daughter Karen, who now headed their investor relations department. Their presence wasn't entirely surprising. Anderson Capital had recently launched a sustainability initiative, a transparent attempt to capitalize on the growing market Ecotech had helped pioneer. As I concluded my speech to enthusiastic applause, I felt a sense of completion. The business world that had once viewed me as merely Mark's wife with a little company now recognized Ecotech as an industry leader and me as its visionary founder. The validation wasn't personal. It was affirmation of our company's mission and the team that had brought it to life. At the reception afterward, I navigated through congratulations and networking conversations, eventually finding myself face to face with Karen Anderson. Up close, her resemblance to her brother was striking. The same confident posture, the same carefully calibrated smile that revealed nothing. "Impressive speech, Jennifer," she said, extending her hand. "Congratulations on Ecotech's success." "Thank you, Karen." I accepted the handshake, noting its professional firmness. "I understand Anderson Capital is moving into sustainable investments now." Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We go where the market opportunities are. Your company has certainly demonstrated the potential in this sector." "Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery," I replied lightly. Karen's laugh held little warmth. "I wouldn't call it imitation. Let's say parallel evolution." She sipped her champagne, studying me over the rim of her glass. "You know, my father has developed a certain respect for you. He doesn't say it directly, of course." "Of course not. He's old school that way. But the fact that he sent us here to hear your keynote, that says something." She glanced around at the crowded reception. "Have you spoken with Mark recently?" The question caught me off guard. Mark and I had maintained minimal contact since the divorce was finalized, exchanging brief, polite messages on rare occasions, but nothing substantive. "Not really," I admitted. "Last I heard, he was heading up your Boston office." Karen nodded. "He was. He's back in Seattle now, temporarily. Dad's health issues." She trailed off, something vulnerable briefly crossing her composed features. "Robert is ill?" Despite everything, the news surprised me. Robert Anderson had always seemed indestructible, a force of nature rather than a mortal man. "Heart attack. 3 weeks ago. Minor, the doctors say, but it scared him. Mark came back to handle some of his responsibilities while he recovers." She finished her champagne in one decisive swallow. "Family obligations." The phrase carried weight, the Anderson sense of dynasty, of bloodline responsibility that had shaped Mark's decisions, including, ultimately, our marriage's end. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it. "I hope he recovers quickly." Karen studied me for a moment, as if trying to determine my sincerity. "I'll tell him you said so," she finally replied. "He may not believe it, but I'll tell him." After she moved on to speak with other attendees, I found myself pondering the unexpected news. Robert Anderson facing mortality was difficult to imagine. His presence had loomed so large in Seattle's business community, and in the dissolution of my marriage, that the thought of him weakened by health concerns shifted something in my perception. Later that evening, I called Samantha from my hotel room, sharing the information about Robert's condition. "Interesting," she said. The timing explains a few things. Anderson Capital pulled out of 2 major acquisitions last month, deals Robert had personally championed. The business press speculated about strategy shifts, but a health crisis makes more sense. Does it change anything for us? I asked, mentally reviewing our ongoing business initiatives for potential vulnerabilities. I don't see how, Samantha replied. Your divorce is final. Ecotech is flourishing independently, and the Anderson chapter of your life is closed. Unless... She hesitated. Unless what? Unless you're feeling some residual emotional connection. To Mark, I mean. The question made me pause. Did I still have feelings for my ex-husband? The immediate pain of betrayal had subsided over the past 18 months, replaced by a more complex understanding of the pressures and expectations that had shaped his choices. No, I said finally. Not in the way you're suggesting. But he's back in Seattle, dealing with his father's illness. It humanizes the situation, I guess. Just be careful, Samantha advised. The Andersons have never struck me as the type to experience personal growth through adversity. More likely, they double down on protecting the family interests. Her warning was reasonable, but something about it rang hollow. The Andersons had been formidable adversaries, certainly, but reducing them to one-dimensional villains felt increasingly simplistic as time passed. Robert was a man facing his mortality. Mark was a son shouldering family responsibilities. Karen was a sister concerned for her father's health. This more nuanced perspective didn't excuse their actions, but it did challenge the clean narrative of justice and retribution I had constructed around our confrontation and its aftermath. I returned to Seattle 2 days later, diving back into Ecotech's operations with renewed focus. Our newest product line, compostable shipping materials designed specifically for the food delivery industry, was launching the following month, and final testing was underway at our research facility. The thermal retention is exceeding expectations, Danny reported during our executive meeting. The containers maintain temperature for 15 minutes longer than our target specification, which gives delivery services a significant advantage. Production costs? I asked, reviewing the spreadsheets. Still running about 7% above projection, Michael, our CFO, admitted. But we've identified several efficiency improvements that should close that gap by second quarter production. The meeting continued with updates from marketing, regulatory compliance, and our international expansion team. Ecotech now employed over 200 people, with offices in Seattle, Portland, and Chicago. Our core leadership team had expanded but remained tight-knit, committed to the company's founding principles even as we grew into a mid-sized public corporation. As the meeting concluded, my assistant Eliza approached with a message slip. "This came while you were in the strategy session," she said quietly. "He asked to speak with you personally." The slip bore a name I hadn't expected. Mark Williams. No message, just a request to call back. I waited until evening to make the call, after the office had emptied, and I could process whatever this conversation might bring without an audience. Mark answered on the second ring. "Jenny," he said, his voice instantly familiar despite the months of silence between us. "Thanks for calling back." "Of course," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Karen mentioned you were back in Seattle. I heard about your father." "Yes, that's part of why I called." He paused, and I could picture him running a hand through his hair, a habitual gesture when he was uncomfortable. Dad's doing better physically, but the heart attack was a wake-up call. He's been reviewing his legacy, I guess you could say. "That sounds like Robert," I commented, unable to keep a touch of dryness from my voice. Robert Anderson's sense of legacy had been a driving force in his attempts to acquire my company. "He's different now," Mark said quietly. "Not completely transformed. I'm not claiming a deathbed conversion to enlightened business practices. But he has regrets, Jenny, about how things went down with you and Ecotech." The admission stunned me into momentary silence. Robert Anderson. Admitting regret contradicted everything I knew about the man. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. "Because he wants to meet with you, not about business," Mark added quickly. "No ulterior motives or acquisition plans, I promise. He just wants to clear the air before time runs out. The prognosis isn't as optimistic as we initially thought." The request was unexpected enough that I didn't have a ready response. My immediate instinct was wariness. The Andersons had proven themselves strategic and manipulative once before. Yet something in Mark's tone suggested genuine concern rather than calculation. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "That's all I can promise right now." "That's fair," Mark acknowledged. "For what it's worth, I think it would be good for both of you." He hesitated before adding, "And Jenny? I saw the conference keynote online. You were incredible. What you've built with Ecotech, it's remarkable." The compliment felt genuine, untainted by the envy or resentment I might have expected. "Thank you," I said simply. After we disconnected, I sat in my office contemplating the unexpected turn of events. Meeting with Robert Anderson again, after everything that had transpired, seemed both unnecessary and potentially unwise. What could possibly be gained from such an encounter? Yet I found myself curious about what Robert might want to say. The man I had known would never admit wrongdoing or express remorse. If illness had indeed changed him, even slightly, witnessing that, transformation might provide a kind of closure I hadn't realized I still needed. I consulted Samantha the next day, outlining Mark's request over lunch at our favorite Thai restaurant near Ecotech's offices. "Absolutely not," was her immediate response. "There's no upside to meeting with Robert. Best case scenario, it's a genuine attempt at reconciliation that serves his peace of mind but does nothing for you. Worst case, it's some kind of manipulation." "You don't think people can change?" I asked, stirring my tom yum soup thoughtfully. "People, yes. Robert Anderson?" She raised a skeptical eyebrow. "This is a man who views business as warfare and family members as troops to be deployed. A heart attack might scare him, but it won't fundamentally alter his worldview." Her assessment aligned with everything we knew about Robert, yet something in me resisted the simplicity of this conclusion. Perhaps it was my own journey over the past year and a half, the way I had evolved beyond anger and vindication toward a more complex understanding of success and failure, connection and independence. "I think I'm going to meet with him," I said finally. "Not at the Anderson offices, somewhere neutral, and I'll go in with clear boundaries about what I'm willing to discuss." Samantha sighed, recognizing the determination in my voice. "At least let me come with you." I shook my head. "If this is truly about closure, it needs to be just us. But I promise to call you immediately after." We arranged the meeting for the following week at a private room in the Washington Athletic Club, neutral territory that offered both discretion and the kind of traditional atmosphere Robert preferred. Mark would accompany his father but promised to give us privacy for the actual conversation. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully in a navy suit that projected confidence without aggression. As I fastened my mother's pearls around my neck, I reflected on how much had changed since I'd last been face-to-face with Robert Anderson. Ecotech had grown from promising startup to industry leader. I had transitioned from betrayed wife to independent CEO recognized for innovation and leadership. Whatever Robert wanted from this meeting, I was approaching it from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. Mark was waiting in the club's lobby when I arrived, his expression a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Thank you for coming," he said, shaking my hand formally. "Dad's upstairs. He had a good day yesterday, but he tires easily now." We rode the elevator in silence, the awkwardness between us palpable. Despite our occasional messages, this was our first in-person meeting since that cafe conversation after our separation. He looked older now, fine lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a slight tension in his shoulders that suggested the weight of his current responsibilities. "How are you, Mark?" I asked, genuinely curious about his life beyond the Anderson business concerns. He seemed surprised by the personal question. Managing, he answered after a moment. The Boston position was going well until Dad's health situation. Now it's... He shrugged. Complicated. Family obligations. The same phrase Karen had used at the conference. And personally? I pressed gently. A fleeting smile crossed his face. I've been seeing someone. Nothing serious yet, but promising. She's a professor at MIT. Environmental science, actually. Brilliant, passionate about her work. Nothing like... He caught himself. She's very different from what you'd expect. The unspoken conclusion hung between us. Nothing like the women the Anderson family would typically approve of. Perhaps Mark was finding his own path after all. I'm glad, I said sincerely. You deserve happiness, Mark. He studied me for a moment as the elevator doors opened. So do you, Jenny. The private meeting room was tastefully appointed with dark wood furniture and subdued artwork, the kind of traditional masculine space where business had been conducted in Seattle for generations. Robert Anderson sat in a high-backed leather chair near the window, his once imposing frame noticeably diminished. His complexion had a grayish undertone that spoke of recent illness, and the hand that gripped his walking cane showed prominent veins and age spots I hadn't noticed before. Yet his eyes remained sharp, taking in my appearance with the same assessing gaze I remembered from family dinners and business functions. Jennifer, he said, his voice raspier than I recalled, but still carrying authority. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Mark excused himself quietly, promising to return in 30 minutes and leaving me alone with the man who had once orchestrated the attempted takeover of my company and the dissolution of my marriage. Please, sit. Robert gestured to the chair, opposite his. No need to stand on ceremony. I took the offered seat, maintaining professional composure. Mark mentioned your health has been challenging. I'm sorry to hear that. Robert waved away the concern. Terminal, as it turns out. The heart attack was just a symptom of larger problems. 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. He delivered. This prognosis with the same matter-of-fact tone he might use to describe disappointing quarterly results, acknowledging reality without emotional indulgence. I'm sorry, I repeated, genuinely moved despite our history. No matter our conflicts, facing mortality deserved basic human compassion. I didn't ask you here for sympathy, he said, studying me intently. Nor for forgiveness, though I imagine that's what Mark hopes will come of this meeting. Then why am I here, Robert? He shifted slightly in his chair, a movement that seemed to cause him discomfort, though his expression remained controlled. Respect, he said finally. I wanted to tell you directly that I respect what you've built with Ecotech. You outmaneuvered me, something few have managed in 50 years of business. Coming from Robert Anderson, this was extraordinary acknowledgement. I remained silent, sensing he had more to say. I was wrong about you, he continued after a moment. I saw you as an amateur playing at business, someone who had created an interesting product but lacked the vision and fortitude to build something lasting. I thought bringing Ecotech into the Anderson portfolio would be doing you a favor. His mouth twisted in a wry smile. Arrogance has always been my particular vice. It wasn't personal, I said, understanding now what this conversation meant to him. It was business strategy. That's what I told myself, he agreed. But business is always personal at some level, isn't it? Especially family business. He looked out the window at the Seattle skyline, buildings where countless deals had been made and broken over the decades. I pushed Mark too hard on the Ecotech acquisition, put him in an impossible position between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to the family legacy. The acknowledgement of Mark's conflict was unexpected. Robert had always seemed oblivious to, or unconcerned with, the emotional complexities of business relationships. Why tell me this now? I asked. Mortality has a way of clarifying priorities, he replied, turning back to face me. I've spent my life building Anderson Capital, expanding our influence, accumulating wealth and power. Now, facing the end, I find myself reconsidering what constitutes a worthy legacy. He paused, collecting his thoughts. The Chen partnership was brilliant, by the way. Using my own rivalry against me, I should have anticipated it, but I underestimated you. A mistake I wouldn't make again if I had more time. The compliment, delivered with genuine professional appreciation, struck me as the most honest interaction we'd ever had. This was Robert speaking as one business strategist to another, without the condescension that had colored our previous encounters. Your prenuptial agreement was equally well conceived, he added. Samantha Torres is formidable. I tried to hire her away from her firm after our confrontation. Did you know that? She declined in rather colorful terms. Despite myself, I smiled. That sounds like Sam. Robert nodded, a hint of his old shrewd expression returning. You've surrounded yourself with loyal, capable people. That's a true measure of leadership, the quality of those who choose to follow you. We sat in silence. For a moment, the weight of our shared history and this unexpected conversation settling between us. I had come prepared for manipulation, for subtle attempts to regain control of the narrative. Instead, I found a man stripped of pretense by the prospect of his own ending, offering not apology, but recognition. Perhaps the only currency he truly valued. I hope you understand, I said finally, that I never wanted to destroy what you built. I just couldn't allow you to take what I had created. Of course not, he agreed. You protected your interests against a hostile action, textbook business defense. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent. But I wonder, now that you've achieved such success, do you ever think about what might have been possible with Anderson Capital's resources behind you from the beginning? The international expansion you could have accelerated? The additional product lines you could have developed? The question wasn't asked with his former manipulative intent, but from what seemed like genuine curiosity. Did I ever wonder about the road not taken? Sometimes, I admitted. But any partnership requires alignment of values, not just resources. Ecotech's mission has always been about sustainable innovation, not just profit maximization. That fundamental difference in approach would have created friction eventually, no matter what structure we established. Robert nodded slowly. Values, he repeated, as if considering the concept from a new angle. I've always believed that business values were simple: growth, profit, market dominance. Everything else was sentimental distraction. And now? I asked, sensing the reflective quality in his tone. Now? He looked down at his hands, the skin thin over prominent knuckles. Now I wonder if focusing exclusively on those metrics was short-sighted. If perhaps building something that outlasts you requires more than just financial success. He glanced up, his expression wry. Don't misunderstand. I'm not having some dramatic deathbed conversion to corporate philanthropy. Just reconsidering certain assumptions. Our conversation continued for another 20 minutes, touching on Ecotech's recent innovations, the changing landscape of sustainable business, and the future of the Anderson enterprises under Mark's eventual leadership. Throughout, Robert maintained the direct, unvarnished communication style that had characterized his business dealings, but without the dismissive edge I remembered from our previous interactions. As our time drew to a close, he reached for the cane propped against his chair, preparing to stand. I instinctively moved to assist him, but he waved me off with a flash of his former pride. I can manage, he said firmly, though the effort clearly cost him. Once upright, he extended his hand to me. Thank you for coming today, Jennifer. It was enlightening. I accepted the handshake, feeling the surprising fragility of his grip. "I'm glad we had this conversation, Robert." As Mark returned to escort his father out, Robert paused at the doorway, turning back to face me. "Ecotech is positioning for European expansion, I understand?" The question caught me off guard, not because the information was confidential. Our international plans had been outlined in recent shareholder communications, but because of its seemingly random nature after our reflective conversation. "Yes," I confirmed cautiously. "We're exploring manufacturing partnerships in Germany and the Netherlands." Robert nodded. "Anderson Capital maintains significant relationships with Blaustein Industries in Munich. Their manufacturing capabilities would align well with your requirements." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card, extending it toward me. "Klaus Blaustein, tell him I suggested you connect." I accepted the card, momentarily speechless at this unexpected offering. Was this Robert's version of an olive branch? Or simply a businessman recognizing a mutually beneficial opportunity, even with a former adversary? "Thank you," I said finally. "I'll reach out to him." "Good," Robert nodded once, definitively. "Goodbye, Jennifer." As they departed, I remained in the meeting room, processing the unexpected encounter. The Robert Anderson I had just spoken with was both familiar and transformed, still shrewd and unapologetically strategic, yet capable of reflection and even, in his own way, respect. Later that evening, I called Samantha as promised, recounting the conversation in detail. "Fascinating," she said when I finished. "So no manipulation? No hidden agenda? Just professional recognition?" "And perhaps a kind of closure," I added. "For both of us, in different ways. Are you going to contact this Blaustein person?" I glanced at the business card on my desk, considering. "Yes, I think I will. Our research team has already identified German manufacturers as potential partners. If Robert's connection provides a legitimate advantage, it would be foolish to ignore it based on past conflicts. Just be careful," Samantha cautioned, though with less urgency than before. "Even a changed Robert Anderson is still Robert Anderson." "Of course," I agreed. "Trust but verify. Isn't that what you always say?" After we hung up, I sat on my penthouse balcony, watching twilight settle over the city. The conversation with Robert had stirred unexpected emotions. Not regret over the choices I'd made, but a more nuanced understanding of the complex human factors that had shaped our confrontation and its aftermath. Robert had been wrong in his tactics and his assumptions about me, but right about certain business realities. I had been right to protect Ecotech's independence, but perhaps overly simplistic in viewing the Andersons as one-dimensional antagonists rather than complicated individuals operating from their own values and pressures. The realization didn't change the fundamental rightness of my actions or the success Ecotech had achieved independently, but it did deepen my perspective on the journey, the ways we all navigate between conviction and compromise, between protecting what we've built and remaining open to unexpected possibilities. As darkness fell and the city lights brightened against the night sky, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would call Klaus Blaustein and explore the manufacturing partnership Robert had suggested. Not out of sentimentality or reconciliation, but because good business meant recognizing valuable opportunities wherever they originated. Ecotech's path forward would continue to be guided by our core mission and values. But perhaps that path could now incorporate wisdom from unexpected sources, even from a former adversary who, facing his own mortality, had found the capacity to acknowledge a worthy opponent. 3 years had passed since my conversation with Robert Anderson. Ecotech had grown into a global enterprise with manufacturing facilities across North America and Europe, our sustainable packaging revolutionizing how companies shipped their products worldwide. The connection with Blaustein Industries had indeed proven valuable, opening doors throughout the European market that might have taken years to access otherwise. Robert hadn't lived to see the full flowering of that partnership. He passed away 6 months after our meeting, his condition deteriorating more rapidly than expected. I attended the funeral, a gesture that surprised many in Seattle's business community, but felt right to me. Whatever our past conflicts, we had reached a kind of understanding in those final months, occasionally exchanging brief emails about industry developments or potential business opportunities. Our communication, stripped of the personal animosity that had once defined our interactions. Mark had delivered the eulogy, speaking eloquently about his father's business acumen and family dedication. When he mentioned that Robert's final advice to him had been to recognize worthy competitors and learn from them rather than simply trying to defeat them, our eyes met briefly across the crowded cathedral. The lesson had come late in Robert's life, but it had come. Now, standing in Ecotech's expanded Seattle headquarters, looking out at Elliott Bay from my corner office, I reflected on how much had changed. Our company employed over 500 people globally. Our stock had split twice since the IPO, and our innovations in sustainable packaging had earned recognition from environmental organizations and business publications alike. My personal life had evolved as well. While I hadn't remarried, I had found balance between my professional commitments and personal relationships. I maintained a close friendship with Samantha, whose law practice now specialized in protecting entrepreneurs from predatory business tactics. I had reconnected with family and old friends who had sometimes felt sidelined during my marriage to Mark. And yes, there had been a few relationships, none lasting, but each offering companionship and perspective during this phase of my journey. A knock at my office door interrupted my reflections. Danny entered, tablet in hand, her role as Chief Operating Officer evident in her confident bearing. She had grown alongside Ecotech, her leadership instrumental in our continued success. The Anderson Capital team is here for the partnership discussion, she said, her expression carefully neutral. Even after all this time, the Anderson name carried weight in our company history. Thank you, I replied, gathering my notes. Conference room A? Danny nodded. Everything's set up. Do you want me to start without you? No, I'll be right there. The meeting ahead represented a significant shift in Ecotech's relationship with Anderson Capital. In the years following Robert's death, Mark had gradually transformed the company's approach, focusing more on strategic partnerships than acquisitions, emphasizing sustainable investments rather than purely profit-driven ventures. Our past conflict had evolved into a cautious professional respect, with occasional collaboration on industry initiatives. Today's discussion would take that evolution a step further. A formal partnership between Ecotech and Anderson Capital's renewable materials division, combining our packaging technology with their advanced recycling infrastructure. The potential environmental impact was substantial, potentially diverting millions of tons of waste from landfills annually. I paused at my office door, taking a deep breath to center myself. This meeting wasn't about the past, the anniversary, dinner confrontation, the prenup clause, the divorce. It was about creating something meaningful that served both business interests and environmental needs, a partnership built on mutual respect rather than dominance. The conference room fell, silent as I entered, all eyes turning toward me. The Anderson Capital team sat on one side of the long table, 4 executives led by Mark, whose position as CEO had been confirmed by the board following a 2-year transition period after his father's death. My own team occupied the opposite side with space at the head of the table for me. Good morning, everyone, I began, taking my seat. Thank you all for being here for what I believe could be a transformative collaboration. Mark nodded across the table, his expression professional but with a warmth that would have been unimaginable during our contentious separation. The years had matured him, the responsibilities of leadership and the distance from his father's shadow allowing him to develop his own business philosophy. Jenny, he acknowledged. We're excited about the possibilities. The meeting proceeded smoothly, our teams presenting data, asking questions, identifying potential synergies and challenges. The thoroughness of the preparation on both sides reflected the seriousness with which we approached this partnership, not an impulsive decision, but a carefully considered strategic alliance. As the discussion progressed, I observed Mark's leadership style with professional interest. He listened attentively to his team's input, asked incisive questions, and demonstrated genuine enthusiasm for the environmental impact of our proposed collaboration. This was not the Mark who had once presented me with ownership transfer papers at our anniversary dinner, expecting compliance with his father's wishes. When the meeting concluded 2 hours later, with clear next steps and timeline established, I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. Not triumph, not vindication, but something more sustainable. The knowledge that both Ecotech and Anderson Capital had evolved toward a more balanced approach to business. "Could we speak privately for a moment?" Mark asked as our teams gathered their materials and filed out of the conference room. I nodded, curious about what he might want to discuss outside the structured agenda. When the door closed behind the last team member, we were left alone in the spacious room with its views of the Seattle skyline, a city where both our companies had deep roots. "This partnership would have been unimaginable a few years ago," Mark said, looking out at the view rather than directly at me. "Dad would have pushed for acquisition or nothing, and honestly, I would have agreed with him." "People change," I replied. "Companies too when the leadership evolves." He turned to face me, his expression reflective. "After our divorce, when I moved to Boston, I was angry, not just at you, but at myself for being caught between loyalties. It took time to recognize that the conflict wasn't inevitable, that there could have been a middle path if I'd been willing to stand up to my father earlier, if I'd truly valued your work on its own terms." The candor of his assessment surprised me. We had maintained professional courtesy in our occasional interactions over the years, but had carefully avoided revisiting our personal history. "We were both navigating complicated territory," I acknowledged. "The intersection of marriage and business rarely comes with a clear roadmap." Mark smiled slightly. "Always diplomatic, Jenny. Even when you have every right not to be." He hesitated, before continuing. "I wanted to tell you something before it becomes public knowledge. I'm engaged." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "The MIT professor?" He looked surprised that I remembered. "Yes, Elizabeth. She's taken a position at the University of Washington. We're getting married in the spring." "I'm happy for you, Mark." "Thank you." He seemed to be weighing his next words carefully. "She insisted on a prenuptial agreement, you know. Said she'd observed too many smart women lose control of their work through marriage to understand the importance of clear boundaries." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Smart woman," I commented. "She is." Mark's expression turned serious again. "I learned a lot from our marriage, Jenny, and from its ending. About respect, about partnership, about the difference between support and control. Those lessons have shaped how I lead Anderson Capital now, and how I approach my relationship with Elizabeth." The admission touched me unexpectedly. How rare it was for people to acknowledge growth that came from painful experiences, to recognize lessons learned through conflict and loss. "The prenup clause was never meant to be activated," I said quietly. "It was protection I hoped I'd never need." "I know that now." Mark gathered his portfolio, preparing to leave. "The partnership we're discussing today, it's not about making amends or correcting the past. It's simply good business that happens to have environmental benefits. But on a personal level, I'm glad we've found our way to this point." As he reached the door, he turned back. "Elizabeth asked if you might be willing to meet her sometime. No pressure, just thought I'd mention it." The request caught me off guard. "I'd like that," I found myself saying, and realized I meant it. After Mark left, I remained in the conference room, contemplating the journey that had brought us to this moment. From adversaries in a bitter business and personal conflict to potential partners in a venture with meaningful environmental impact. Not friends exactly, but professionals who had found a way past old wounds toward something constructive. That evening, I invited Samantha to dinner at my penthouse, cooking the pasta primavera we'd shared during many late nights strategizing during the divorce and company protection efforts. "So, a formal partnership with Anderson Capital," she mused, accepting a glass of wine. "Full circle moment." "Not quite full circle," I corrected, stirring the sauce. "More like a spiral, covering similar ground, but at a different level." Samantha laughed. Always the perfectionist with language. "But you know what I mean. From hostile takeover attempt to collaborative partnership, it's quite the evolution. The companies are different now. Mark is different. I'm different." "True enough." She studied me over the rim of her glass. "You seem at peace with it all." The observation was accurate. The anger and hurt that had fueled my defensive strategies years ago had gradually transformed into something more nuanced, an understanding that business conflicts, like personal ones, were rarely simple matters of heroes and villains, but complex interactions between people with different values, priorities, and perspectives. I acknowledged. Not because I've forgotten what happened, but because I've integrated it into a larger story. One where defending what I built didn't mean carrying resentment forever. "Wise words," Samantha nodded. "Though I hope you haven't gone completely zen on me. A healthy dose of strategic thinking is still essential in business." "Trust me, I haven't abandoned caution. The partnership agreement will be watertight, with clear protections for Ecotech's interests." We laughed together, the comfort of long friendship evident in our easy conversation. Samantha had been there through every phase of my journey, from helping craft the prenuptial clause that protected my company to celebrating Ecotech's public offering to advising on our international expansion. Her support had been unwavering, her counsel invaluable. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when you first showed me that clause Robert had highlighted at your anniversary dinner, I never imagined it would lead to all this. I just wanted to protect your company." "You did," I assured her. "That protection created space for everything that followed: Ecotech's growth, my personal development, even the possibility of this new partnership." "Boundaries create freedom," Samantha observed. "Something I tell all my clients now, thanks to your example." Later, after dinner, we stood on my balcony watching the city lights, much as I had on so many pivotal evenings throughout this journey. The Seattle skyline had changed over the years, new towers, evolving architecture, yet remained fundamentally recognizable, just as my own life had transformed while maintaining its essential core. "What's next for you, Jenny?" Samantha asked, breaking our comfortable silence. "Ecotech is established. The Anderson partnership will open new markets. Your leadership team is strong. Have you thought about your next challenge?" The question was one I'd been considering myself in recent months. Success brought the privilege of choices, of potential directions that would have seemed impossible during those early struggles. "I'm exploring options," I admitted. "The Governor's Sustainability Council has approached me about a leadership role. There's potential for Ecotech to develop an educational foundation focused on circular economy principles. And I've been toying with the idea of writing a book about business ethics and sustainable leadership." "All worthy pursuits," Samantha nodded. "You've earned the right to choose." That was it, exactly. The freedom to choose based on interest, an impact rather than necessity or reaction. The prenup clause I had activated at that anniversary dinner had protected my company in a moment of crisis, but the true value of that protection had unfolded gradually in the years that followed. It had preserved my ability to determine my own path, to build something aligned with my values, to establish relationships, both business and personal, based on mutual respect rather than power imbalances. 2 weeks later, I found myself at a small cafe in the University District, meeting Elizabeth Chen, the environmental science professor who would soon become Mark's wife. She was everything he had described: brilliant, passionate about her work, with a quiet confidence that needed no external validation. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said as we sat with our coffee. "I know it's an unusual request." "Life rarely follows expected patterns," I replied. "At least in my experience." Elizabeth smiled. "Mark has told me about your history, the business conflict, the divorce. He speaks of you with great respect, you know." "That's evolved over time," I acknowledged. "We've both grown." "That's precisely why I wanted to meet you," she said, leaning forward slightly. "I'm developing a new course on business ethics with an environmental focus. Your experience with ecotech, building a successful company that prioritizes sustainability without compromising profitability, would provide valuable insight for my students." The request was unexpected but intriguing. "You want me to speak to your class?" "Initially, yes, but I'm hoping for something more substantial, perhaps co-developing case studies or even a more formal role as a guest lecturer. The intersection of business leadership and environmental innovation is exactly what today's students need to understand." As Elizabeth outlined her vision for the course, I found myself increasingly engaged. Teaching had never been part of my career plan, but sharing the lessons learned throughout Ecotech's journey, including the crucial importance of maintaining independence and aligning business practices with core values, could benefit a new generation of entrepreneurs. "I'd like to be involved," I decided. "Let's explore what that might look like." Elizabeth's expression brightened. "Wonderful. My department chair will be thrilled." She hesitated before adding, "I hope this doesn't seem inappropriate given your history with Mark." "Not at all," I assured her. "The past is instructive, not restrictive. We've all moved forward." As we continued our discussion, mapping out possibilities for collaboration, I reflected on the unexpected paths life could take. Who would have imagined that the woman who had once fought to protect her company from the Anderson family would now be planning an educational partnership with the future Mrs. Williams? Yet it felt right, another step in the ongoing journey that had begun with that prenuptial clause. What had started as protection had created space for growth, for evolution, for new connections that transcended old conflicts. Driving back to my office afterward, I passed the building where Ecotech had begun, a modest space now occupied by a tech startup, the circle of entrepreneurial ambition continuing with new players. My phone chimed with a message from Danny, confirming that our legal team had completed the initial draft of the Anderson Capital Partnership Agreement. Everything connected, past choices shaping present opportunities, protection enabling collaboration, conflict eventually yielding to mutual respect. The anniversary dinner confrontation had been a crucial turning point, but not the defining moment of my story. It was simply one important link in a continuous chain of decisions, actions, and growth. The prenup clause I activated had changed everything, yes. But the true transformation had been in how that moment of strength had created possibilities I couldn't have imagined as I walked away from that disastrous dinner years ago. Not just business success, but a fuller understanding of myself and what I valued most: independence coupled with meaningful connection, protection that ultimately enabled collaboration, boundaries that created freedom. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.